It's February 27th, 1959, atop the snowy, wind-swept peaks of the Ural Mountains in western Siberia. A small search party closes in on its target. The group, all student volunteers, are looking for their classmates, a team of 9 skiers who vanished in these mountains about a week ago. And already, it's clear that something's wrong. 2 days ago, the search party found the group's ski tracks. Then they came across the tent, half buried in snow, slashed open, and left abandoned. Now the search party has found footprints. They lead down a slope towards the tree line. Some of the prints are from boots. Others, however, are from bare feet. As they follow the prints to the edge of the forest, they see something. It's the remains of a small campfire. And right there, the search party's worst fears come true. There lie 2 bodies, stiff, frozen, and motionless on the ground. The searchers recognize them. They're looking at the corpses of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, 2 members of the missing skiing group. And it's no wonder they're frozen. For some reason, they're dressed only in their underwear. Close by, the search party finds the body of Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader. He's lying in the snow with no boots on, his arms desperately wrapped around a birch tree. The searchers glance up. The branches above Igor's corpse are broken, and scraps of skin and torn fabric hang from the bark. It's almost like someone tried to climb the tree in a panic. Next, they find Rustem Slobodin and Zinaida Kolmogorova, all frozen to death, too. Zinaida's fists are clenched, and her body is facing the direction of the tent, like she had been crawling back toward it. The other 4 members of the group are still missing. What the searchers don't know yet is that these bodies lie hidden in a nearby ravine, buried under 4 meters of snow. They won't be discovered until May, once the snow started to melt. And it's with all the bodies in their possession that Soviet investigators will finally uncover the true scale of this mystery. While all 9 of the skiing party were found scattered within a few hundred meters of their tent, some of them also suffered strange, traumatic injuries. Alexander Koletavov's neck was twisted to a strange angle. The skull of the group's cameraman, Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignol's, was fractured so badly that shards of bone were sticking into his brain. Semyon Zolotaryov and Lyudmila Dubinina had crushed chests and broken ribs. One doctor said the force needed to cause those injuries was far beyond what a human could inflict. It was more like what you'd see in a high-speed car crash. But at the same time, their bodies had no external bruises or wounds to suggest an attack. Investigators would also discover more disturbing details, however. Zolotaryov's body was missing its eyes. Dubinina's was missing her tongue, as well as parts of her upper lip and facial tissue. Then there was Krivonishenko, the musician of the group who played mandolin. A chunk of flesh was found in his mouth, but it was from his own hand, as though he'd bitten off his knuckle. With each discovery the forensic team made, the weirder things got. The 4 bodies found later in spring were wearing clothes that belonged to the others. And what's more, some of those clothes tested positive for radiation. All in all, these findings, combined with a forensic sweep of the mountain, painted a very strange picture indeed. As far as investigators could tell, at around midnight on February 1st, the skiing party fled their tent in a panic. They didn't even feel they had the time to unbutton the tent. They slashed it open from the inside with a knife. Then, despite strong winds and temperatures near minus 25 degrees Celsius, they ran out into the night. Some were barefoot, some were nearly naked. They all headed towards the forest, even though they knew they would likely freeze to death there. And all the while, it seems they were alone. Investigators found no evidence of anyone else nearby. And that's where, with no pun intended, the trail ran cold. There was just one more unsettling detail left. The slope where the group was found dead was called Kolatsiak. It's a word from the language of the indigenous Mansi people, and it means, according to some, dead mountain. In the end, the question that haunts this case is this: what was so terrifying that it made the group leave their tent at night? Let's find out. 10 people originally set out on this doomed expedition on January 23rd, 1959. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, an engineering student from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, or UPI, in Sverdlovsk, now called Yekaterinburg. Most of them were students in their early to mid-20s. They were smart, experienced skiers and hikers who knew how to handle the snow and the brutal cold of the mountains. There was Yuri Doroshenko and Dyatlov's close friend Yuri Krivonyshenko, a recent UPI graduate with an unusual job. He worked at Mayak, a Soviet nuclear facility in the secret town of Chelyabinsk 40. Despite the nature of his work, he was the group's joker, always lifting the group's spirits and serenading them with tunes on his mandolin. Also in this group was Rustem Slobodin, Yuri Yudin and Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, all recent graduates from UPI. Zinaida Kolmogorova and Lyudmila Dubinina were the only women in the group. At just 20, Dubinina was the youngest of them all. She was athletic, fiercely committed to communism, and was rarely seen smiling. This made for a strange contrast with her blonde braids, which she tied up neatly with ribbons. And then there was Semyon Zolotaryov, a 37-year-old World War II veteran with tattoos and steel crowns in his teeth. He joined the group at the last minute, apparently at the request of the UPI administrators. Why they wanted him there, though, no one's really sure. The plan was to ski for 16 days through the northern Urals, a mountain range that separates Europe from Asia. The group would be following a remote, challenging route that no Russian had ever completed before. The terrain wasn't the concern, though. The group would be travelling over forested hills and gentle slopes. It was perfect for skiing. Instead, what they would be braving was the weather. Siberian winter is no joke. At that time of year, temperatures can fall below minus 30 degrees Celsius. The snow would be exceptionally deep in places, and the area was prone to strong, windy snowstorms. But none of this was going to shake the group's confidence. Each member, after all, was looking to earn their Grade 3 certification, a top-level mountaineering qualification in the Soviet Union that required a 300-kilometre trek. All of them already were Grade 2 hikers with ski tour experience. The group even kept their spirits up when things started to go wrong. On January the 28th, one of the members, Yuri Yudin, had to turn back. He was suffering from sciatica, and the pain had become too much. In the end, this decision likely saved his life. Sadly, Yudin would never see his friends alive again. As the expedition pressed on, Dyatlov sent regular telegrams to the university's sports club to confirm the group's progress. The last message was expected around February 12th, once the group reached their final stop at the tiny village of Vizhai. But no message ever arrived. At first, though, nobody panicked. It was quite possible that the group was delayed, and they knew that snowstorms were common in the region. But as the days passed, the students' families started to worry. Frantic phone calls flooded the university, and so eventually they decided to send out search parties. On February the 20th, a fleet of military helicopters touched down on the snowy caps of the Ural Mountains. Out poured multiple search teams, made up of student volunteers from UPI, local police, prison guards from a nearby camp, and indigenous Mansi hunters. In the end, it would be the students who found their own classmates. Days later, they found the first bodies lying motionless on Kolatsyakal, or Death Mountain. One of them was Mikhail Sharavin, a student volunteer who, in his 80s, would tell the BBC that we were approaching a cedar tree. When we were about 20 metres away, I saw a brown spot near the trunk. When we got closer, we saw two bodies lying there. The hands and feet were reddish brown. The frozen bodies of the first group members, along with their torn tent and scattered belongings, were airlifted from the mountain. The other four wouldn't be found until spring. But already investigators were conducting autopsies, interviewing searchers, and mapping out the scene in painstaking detail. Almost immediately, Soviet authorities launched a criminal investigation led by prosecutor Lev Ivanov, and they didn't waste any time pointing fingers. The Mansi people were indigenous to this part of the Urals and considered the mountains sacred. As a result, Soviet officials initially blamed them for the deaths, claiming the skiing group had been killed for trespassing on holy ground. Valery Anyamov, an anti-community leader whose father helped look for the missing group in 1959, told the BBC Soviet investigators were convinced the Mansi must have killed them. So many people around here were arrested. A woman from another village used to say the secret police tortured them. I don't know if that's true, but they were certainly interrogated for weeks. But there was a problem with that theory. The group's tent, found slashed open, was reassembled at a local police station. At first, it looked like evidence of foul play, until a seamstress determined the cuts had been made from the inside. The group had fled on their own. There were no signs of a struggle, and no other footprints around the campsite. Then, in May, the thaw finally came, and the last 4 bodies were uncovered. By the Mansi people, no less. Despite the disturbing injuries they found on the bodies, investigators concluded that murder was no longer the cause of death. The Mansi people were finally ruled out. Instead, authorities settled on a new conclusion. The skiers, they said, had been killed by, quote, an overwhelming natural force which they were not able to overcome. In other words, they assumed an avalanche had killed the group. With that, on May 28, 1959, the case was closed, and like many domestic incidents in Soviet Russia at the time, the investigation was classified. It would remain so for years to come. Either way, the job of Ivanov, the prosecutor, was only to determine whether or not a crime had been committed, and with homicide ruled out, there was nothing left to do. The group's tent and expedition gear was boxed up and stored as evidence, but over time it gathered mould and was thrown away. As for the families of the dead, they were furious. Many of them wrote letters to high-ranking officials, including the leader of the Soviet Union at the time, Nikita Khrushchev, pleading for a more thorough investigation. But nothing more was done. Instead, the area of the Urals that the group had been heading for was renamed in honor of their leader. It's known today as the Dyatlov Pass. Over the many years, however, plenty of theories emerged about what actually happened to this expedition. More than 75, in fact. And this was just the one submitted to the prosecutor's office. Many people didn't believe the Soviet theory of a regular snow avalanche. There wasn't enough debris in the area, they said, only a light layer of snow covering the bodies and the tent. The mountains along the route that the group had taken aren't towering peaks either. They're more like tall hills. And while the group did pitch their tent against the slope for protection from the wind, people said that it seemed too shallow to trigger a fall. The Dyatlov group were no amateurs either. They were highly trained, experienced mountaineers. Would they really set up camp in the path of a potential avalanche? That said, some of the theories that replaced this one weren't exactly any more believable. Some say the group was killed by a Yeti. The final photograph recovered from Thibaut Brignol's camera shows a tall, shadowy figure standing in the woods. It has no face and no clear features. It's just a silhouette among the trees. This blurry photo has become famous amongst conspiracy theorists. The Discovery Channel even released an entire documentary about this photo in 2014 called Russian Yeti, The Killer Lives. Really, though, the figure was almost certainly a member of the group. After all, the group wrote a satirical propaganda leaflet which was later found in their tent. It read, Science. In recent years, there has been a heated debate about the existence of the Yeti. Latest evidence indicates that the Yeti lives in the northern Urals, near Mount Ortorten. Near Mount Ortorten, in the northern Urals, is exactly where the group's expedition took place. There's another popular theory that's also far more sinister. Given that the Soviet Union was deep in the Cold War in 1959, some say that the group were caught up in a secret weapons test. After all, some of their clothing was found to be radioactive. One official even later claimed that these radiation levels were likely higher before, but were washed away by flowing water as the bodies lay in the ravine for months. In one interview decades later, Yevgeny Okishev, an official who helped oversee the initial investigation, told the press that he found it suspicious that his team was ordered to test the recovered items for radiation. Apparently, he even wrote to his superiors asking for an explanation, but instead of getting an answer, he says he got a visit from the Deputy Prosecutor General, who dodged questions about weapons testing and told him to rule the deaths accidental. Funnily enough, one of the biggest supporters of this theory was the only surviving member of the group, Yuri Yudin, who turned back early on the trip. Yuri lived for decades haunted by the mystery, and he followed the case obsessively. He believed, until the end of his life, that his friends were killed by weapons tests. He even claimed the bodies were flown in by a helicopter and staged to make it look like they froze. Yuri later recalled to press how, when he attended the funeral of his friends, he thought their bodies looked suspicious. He said that, quote, "The coffins were open, and I could see that their faces were the colour of bricks. Everyone was talking, but there was nothing in the newspapers. We thought it must be some kind of state secret." Years later, when a BBC crew visited Yuri's apartment, they found a shrine dedicated to the group in his living room. There were oil portraits of each student on the walls, and shelves crammed with their expedition equipment. Could Yuri have been onto something? Or did he just miss his friends? Some say that his obsession with the case was just a sign of survivor's guilt. Sadly, Yuri died in 2013 without ever knowing the truth. Either way, it seems that most of the evidence disagrees with him. If weapons testing had taken place on the mountain, the entire area would have been contaminated, but it wasn't. And if the bodies had been flown in by helicopter, why would their killers go to such an effort to hide them in such strange positions? You'd think the authorities would want to avoid inviting any speculation about their deaths. Snow doesn't lie either. There would be track marks, prints, and easy giveaways that somebody else was involved. And to top it off, despite the declassification of Soviet records dating back to the incident and repeated efforts by the public to search the area, no real evidence of weapons or military bases have ever been found. Even the radiation found on the group's clothes can be explained away, some say. For one, the group apparently used lanterns that contained thorium, a radioactive element which may have left traces on their clothes. What's more, one member of the group, Yuri Krivonashenko, was part of the cleanup crew for the 1957 Mayak nuclear disaster, which released a radioactive plume into the air stretching 200 miles. Some sources suggest that another member of the group lived in a village located within the fallout zone, though that's never been confirmed. If it's true, though, perhaps the radiation found on their clothes was there long before they died. Next, as always with these things, there's the UFO explanation. In a 1990 article, Lev Ivanov, the original prosecutor on the case, claimed he'd been pressured in 1959 to leave out evidence of UFO activity, including strange burn marks found on nearby trees. These marks, he wrote, confirmed that some kind of heat ray, say, or a powerful force whose nature is completely unknown, to us at least, acted selectively on specific objects. These objects being, of course, the ski group. Sanka, the mother of Mansi leader Valery Anyamov, whose father took part in the search, told the BBC she was out gathering firewood in February 1959 when she saw something strange in the sky. She said, "We were coming back from the forest and we could see the village ahead of us. This bright, burning object appeared. It was wider at the front and narrower at the back, with a tail, and there were sparks flying off of it." Many of these theories, UFOs included, have a distinctly Cold War flavour. Another one suggests that Zolotaryov, the 37-year-old war veteran who joined the group at the last minute, was actually a KGB agent. According to this theory, he was using the ski trip as a cover to meet with CIA operatives, but the mission went wrong and the group was killed on sight. Another, put forward by the author Donny Akar in his 2013 book Dead Mountain, suggests the cause was infrasound, a type of low-frequency vibration created when wind passes over the mountain. The theory goes that this sound triggered panic in the group, causing them to flee the tent. In the darkness, he says, some may have stumbled into the ravine, suffering fatal injuries from the fall. Maybe these far-fetched theories help explain why, in February 2019, the Russian government decided to reopen the case and to try and settle it once and for all. There was a catch, though. The authorities said they were only considering 3 theories: no Yetis, UFOs, or secret agents. Instead, they supposed it was either a regular avalanche that killed the group, a hurricane, or something called a snow slab avalanche. Alexander Kurenoy, the official representative of Russia's prosecutor general at the time, said, "All of our theories are somehow connected with natural phenomena. Crime is out of the question. There is not a single proof, even an indirect one, to favour this criminal version." It was time for a new prosecutor to take the reins of the case, Andrei Kuryakov, and he stuck with the snow slab theory as the best explanation. To give you some overview, a snow slab is not like a regular avalanche which tumbles down a steep mountainside. Instead, it builds up on a slope, much like the one the group pitched their tent against in 1959. When snow is compacted over and over again by strong winds, it can create huge, solid blocks. And if the snow beneath this block is weak enough, it can cause the block to slide down the slope, crushing everything underneath. If a slab avalanche slid over the group's tent, it might have injured some of them, which could explain why they fled outside in panic. The tent was pitched against the slope, after all, probably to help shield them against the wind. In 2021, two Swiss researchers, Alexander Puzurin and Johann Gohm, tested this theory. They found two key things. First, the slope where the group camped was steeper than it looked, about 30 degrees, which is enough to cause slab avalanches. And second, the way the group cut into the slope to pitch their tent may have destabilized it. They also knew that the group reported heavy winds in their diaries at the time. All combined, the weather and this rare snow slab avalanche may have fooled the group and ultimately killed them. The researchers' computer models showed the avalanche wouldn't have been huge either. Maybe a block of snow about 16 feet long, roughly the size of an SUV. This small size explains why the investigators initially missed it. The avalanche would have filled in the campsite before being covered by fresh snow. But the question still remains, how could such a small avalanche cause the serious injuries that the victims had? And that's when Johann Gohm found inspiration in a very unlikely place. The Disney movie, Frozen. He was so impressed with the snow animations in the movie that he asked the animation team for access to their code, and then he used it for something very un-Disney indeed, to simulate how a snow slab may have brutally killed the 9 members of the ski party. The researchers created their simulation using crash test data collected by General Motors in the 1970s. Originally, this data was used to measure the force needed to cause specific injuries in car accidents and to help design safer seatbelts. In 2021, though, Gohm and Puzurin used this data to work out how much damage a slab avalanche could cause on the human body, and the answer was a lot. They found that even a small slab of snow could deliver enough force to cause catastrophic internal injuries, similar to those seen in high-speed car crashes. However, for such injuries to occur, the avalanche would need to compress the body against something rigid. And that's when the researchers realised that in 1959 there was such surface. When the search party found the group's tent, they noticed that the skiers had placed their skis under their bedding, likely to insulate themselves from the snow. This created a solid base beneath them, and if a heavy snow slab struck the tent, it could have crushed the bodies against the hard surface, causing severe internal trauma without leaving much visible damage on the outside. With this information in hand, the researchers proposed a new theory, and today, it's still the most widely accepted version of events that we have. If a snow slab hit that night, it would have made loud cracking sounds before crushing part of the tent and seriously injuring some of the group. The noise and impact likely triggered panic. Fearing a larger avalanche was coming, they slashed their way out of the tent and fled into the darkness. It would explain why they were found without proper winter clothing and why they were wearing each other's garments. In the chaos, they'd simply grabbed whatever was within reach. They then retreated to what they believed was a safe distance. Some built a fire to keep warm, others dug a snow den. That den then may have collapsed, burying them in the ravine. One of the others may have tried to climb a nearby tree, the one found with broken branches and torn skin, to get a view of the tent. A tent, mind you, which would have been partially under snow. In the end, they wouldn't have seen anything against the howling winds, the darkness, and the thick blanket of snow surrounding them, and so they never made it back. Instead, they succumbed to the freezing temperatures, while scavenging animals likely picked off the woman's missing eyes and tongue later on. Puzurin and Gohm published their grisly findings in 2021, showing that a slab avalanche was possible that night and that it could account for the traumatic injuries. If true, it was a silly mistake that led to such a tragic end for the group. It's where their wilderness experience may have actually doomed them. There was never going to be a bigger avalanche. Yes, they may have been injured, but by staying in or near the tent and then digging themselves out, they could have survived. But by fleeing unprotected into the night and then getting lost in the snow, the group had signed their own death sentence. Freddie Wilkinson, a professional mountain climber and guide, told the National Geographic, quote, I'm absolutely convinced that the tragedy was the result of wind and snow deposition, and the fact that they pitched camp in the lee of a ridge. I've made this mistake in my mountaineering career more than once. After the 2021 study, 3 expeditions to Kholat-Syakhl, or Death Mountain, confirmed the area is definitely prone to slab avalanches. In January 2022, in fact, 2 of them were spotted during weather conditions similar to that fateful night in 1959. But this theory doesn't explain everything, and given the technology available back then, as well as the secretive nature of the Soviet Union's domestic cases, many of the finer details may be forever lost under the snow. In 1958, Krivonoshenko wrote a poem for Dyatlov in preparation for the expedition. It ended with the lines, "Let your footprints trace winding tracks across the map of Russia." These are the footprints tourists follow every year, tracing Dyatlov's route through the Urals to the site where the group met their fate. For some mysteries, it seems, simulations aren't enough. Sometimes we have to go and search out the truth for ourselves.